Welcome to the Dragon's Den. I'm your venerable host, Orochi, and today we're going to continue our depth into the impossible lands. Specifically, today we're going to be touching on Bhopan. Originally, when I thought of doing this one, I thought it was going to be a quick little delve into a extremely tiny speck of a nation, but I'm doing a more in-depth read on it. I think there are some problems in the way it's written, but there is so much interesting culture and history and just the day-to-day life and the way everything operates in this nation. It's, as somebody who's not overly familiar with Galarian as a whole, because I didn't play Pathfinder 1 at all, so I have absolutely no ties to any of the things there that explored Galarian, and so a lot of these places are brand new to me. And having gotten a modest, not a huge way into looking at the places of like Forgotten Realms and Greyhawk and Mystara and several other settings, most of these seem very superficial. They've got a few places of interest, and it's kind of things are just cobbled together by perhaps whatever somebody wrote a cool story in this place, and let's just attach it. That seems like how the Forgotten Realms were originally created, is they just took dozens of stories that were in these small kingdoms or whatever, and then just smashed them all together and say, oh, well, this is the world now. That's how it seems anyway. And a lot of other places, even with a lot more thought put in them, they can still seem kind of generic in a lot of different ways. Whereas the more I see from Galarian, the big flaw for Galarian stuff is that it seems to just cherry pick everything. Like, Galarian is a mix of all sorts of the greatest hits of Earth's history mixed with cool fantasy ideas, right? Because you've got the Egypt people, you got the Roman place, you've got the Druids place, you've got all the greatest eras in human history all mixed together with some degree of fantasy twist on them, maybe a little bit, so you can still see Osirian is literally Egypt because they have the Egyptian gods there, whereas other places are, it's this thing but with like a 75% fantasy twist, so you can barely recognize that, this is what it takes inspiration from. And in that way, I think it might not be to some people's tastes, because once you kind of get that sort of, it's like Kryn in that it's just a whole bunch of different ideas smashed together, that can make it feel bad, especially since fantasy worlds, by their very nature, are nonsensical. Because if you tried to actually plot the history of a world that managed to create multiple, even like 2 or 3 sentient species, never mind the dozens that we have in any of the big selling fantasy worlds we currently have, it's incredibly unlikely to near impossible. I mean, even if like the humans in these fantasy worlds can't be like real world humans, or else we would have literally started a genocidal war against all other species until we were done. That is just the reality of human nature, which is why fantasy humans cannot really represent real humans very well because there is more bad than good if you look at our history realistically. So, in trying to think up how would all of this stuff interact with each other in a logical way to over thousands and thousands and thousands of years get to the modern day that we are currently playing in these fantasy worlds, like I don't think you could create a working time model that would actually make real sense. You would have to like hand wave so much stuff. Or I think the big notion is, oh, well, the gods prevented people from, murdering and genociding entire species off the fucking face of the planet. Which I guess in some respects makes sense, but it can be really wishy-washy, and I could easily see how that can be against a lot of people's, or at least some people's, tastes. So in that way, I dislike that Galarian is sort of like a world of stitched little pieces. But on the other hand, compared to all the other fantasy worlds that I have seen, like there's only maybe one or two that even come anywhere close to just being as interesting. Because you look at all of these places so far, and there's still tons of places we don't know about or don't have a lot of information about. I really hope that they do, that this series eventually gets to more of them that I haven't seen or that hasn't even been explored in Pathfinder 1. And that's why I say get the Lost Omens books, pick them up, because these places are so interesting, and even if you don't use them, they can just inspire you so much. And so taking a look into these places is just so fantastic. And I would even say, as a lot of I've seen a bunch of really popular DMs say, it's fine to take somebody else's ideas and make them your own and put a little spin on, or just use them in your games. So if you make a homebrew game, take some of these places and put them in your game. Put a little bit of a spin on them. Like if you don't like a lot of Alkenstar's, heavy leaning on punk tropes and themes of anti-authoritarian kind of stuff, then change Alkenstar to be more of your standard Wild West kind of game, or make it higher tier steampunk stuff. Like you can just tweak these things a little bit, and they can just open up to so many more themes that people might want to explore. And I think that is a trademark of what makes these ideas so fantastic, which is just interesting, because I don't know how much of this stuff was in some of the earlier iterations that was done by James Jacobs. And every time I have seen some of his reasonings for the reason he makes some of the decisions he's made, or the kind of games that he runs, it's generally the opposite of what I find interesting or what I would have fun in games. So then to know that I don't like the sorts of ideas that he comes up with and the way he presents things, but then to see his world be the absolute best fantasy world you can get to is super interesting. And so I think the end product is far better than maybe the initial designs or something. I don't know. It's super interesting to me that I disagree with a lot of the things I've seen him say about certain things, or just the viewpoint he has on things is not one I find fun, but he makes fantastic content. Like, this is the best fantasy world. And I think Bhopan is one of the places that kind of both showcases the best, and there's a single spot in here which I also think showcases part of the worst parts of, like, did you even think about what you were doing this? And we'll get to that. So this is just the overall, the splash screen for the nation. But the big thing to note about Bhopan is it is a single city on an island, on probably one of the most dangerous islands in Galarian. This is like Monster Island, except for the entire island is heavily Fae themed. This is basically an island that was ripped from the first world and now resides in Galarian. And so there's tons of Fae creatures that live here, and a lot of them are either evil, conniving villains or just, really powerful monsters, animals, that sort of thing. And some of them are like neutral to neutral good kinds of Fae. And I love that it's the idea that it's not the natural world, it's the first world. And living here and trying to understand how the world was before the world that we know it is an incredibly interesting idea, even when you just discard like all of the preconceived notions you might have about what Fae stuff is, which I think is extremely interesting because you can go in so many different directions with that if you just use this like in a homebrew game, because then you can make the Fae be whatever you want. Whereas in this specifically, it's a little bit of everything. There's good-ish Fae, bad-ish Fae. They all just see things in a different way than mortal creatures do, and you kind of have to just deal with what that means. And I find that extremely interesting, because the whole island is infused with Fae magic. There's lots of Fae creatures living here, but it also means that the people are infused with Fae magic. And that is the crux of what makes Bhopan interesting, is that everybody who lives there has been there so long that they have all been in some way touched by Fae magic. Either the ones who mostly look human but just have access to Fae magic, to those that have it so suffused in them that they don't even look human anymore. And a lot of those have also just created an entirely new line that are beastkin. And I think it would maybe be safe to say that the beastkin that live on Bhopan are not like beastkin anywhere else in the world, because beastkin is usually shapeshifters, like lycanthropes. That's sort of the themes that's generally trying to encompass. Where on Bhopan, the beastkin are just humans that have been mutated by Fae magic so much that they might not even have a human form anymore. By the rules, they will, but I could easily see somebody playing a Bhopan beastkin and just saying, yeah, they don't have a human form. Like, their beast form is their natural human form now. And that's crazy interesting, because then how do you they don't ever leave their island or whatever, but if somebody was to meet two of them and try to compare them, it would be so different. And I really like that sort of thing, when you can take two people that are of the same ancestor or similar ancestry from different parts of the world, and they might not have anything in common, so much so that you wouldn't even be able to tell that they are the same ancestry, because they have diverged so much for thousands and thousands of years that they are like different creatures, or in this case, like their origin is so different, like convergent evolution, that their end product is mostly the same creature, but they're completely actually different. That's incredibly interesting to me. I absolutely love that. So that's what this is super fey touched humanoids, some beastkin, some not, and fey, all living on this one island that is extremely dangerous. It protects them from the outside world, so much so that until fairly recently, within one lifetime, the Pathfinder Society has found out that they exist, and after some things happened, the King of Bhopan has sort of been like, well, you know what? We might be safe. We've been safe from the world for thousands of years, but what happened here shows that we're not always completely safe from the world. So maybe we should start going out into the world and making a name for ourselves instead of just trying to stay hidden, and see where that'll lead us if we can make our people stronger. Which is, as a world building sort of thing, is super cool to have things like that change. And I think it's super cool that the society play sort of things do that. I think it's sort of unfortunate that maybe a lot of people don't have access to that sort of thing, or can really get info on it to either play in it or even just to know that sort of thing is happening. Because I didn't until this book literally said that there was a Pathfinder event that happened that changed the history of the world, going forward at least. And I think there's probably a non-insignificant number of people who would love to be in on that stuff, where other people, there's noteworthy other people I have seen who are just like, I want my book to have all the information and I don't want anything to be changed in that. I want to be able to take my book and have it be 100% correct, which I find has problems. But that's a completely another discussion. And here we have the map and the one city of Bhopan, Hobodakuza, which is, again, super interesting that it's just this one city that is this entire culture, because the rest of the island is so dangerous that they do not have the resources to start up like other encampments, because people would get killed. They can't protect, other startups anywhere because of the danger of the island, which is extremely interesting. And I think right here this is the part that I have a problem in. It's settlement level 12, which is fairly high level, pretty decently, but the population, 1,017 people. This is, I can't look at this number and wonder, did anybody even put any thought to this? Because you look at so many other things in this, and it's obvious that people did research. Like, even with the new snake people, the Kajari, they have built into them, and they even have a feat to, I forget what it was, but there's a feat that enhances it, that they don't have eyelids. They don't blink, because snakes don't blink. They are snake people. And so I don't think that's common knowledge at all. Like, the number of people who would know that snakes don't blink is probably really, really small. Like, just reptile enthusiasts, and not even all of them, probably. And so for that information to be baked in there, and how a lot of other stuff is in the Lost Omens and in Pathfinder 2 overall, like the lizard folk, there was a ton of cool stuff that was obviously researched for their feats as well. So it says to me that people are doing a lot of homework and making sure that they are knowledgeable about these things before, submitting ideas, and that's awesome. But a population of 1,000 people is unfathomably small. Like, I know of some places that have like 400 to 800 people living in them. They are teeny tiny little towns that maybe have like, a lot of them probably don't even have a general shop. Like they don't even have one store. You'll have to go multiple towns over just to find a shop where you could maybe buy something. That is what those numbers mean. Like a modest sized rural town in America is like 7,000 to 10,000 people in that's small town America. So to think that this only has 1,000 people, and they have a king, they have nobles, they have, higher class citizens and lower class citizens. They have a, not really military, but they have a town guard, and then they also have an exploratory group that goes out every night and tries to, secure passage for people who are going out and harvesting during the day and that sort of stuff. And so for them only to have 1,000 people does not make any sense to me, because that seems like it's on the verge of collapse. And they tangentially speak about that in this, that the population doesn't waver much, even with people not trying to, have a stable population. Their population is always stable. Like the Fey magic makes it so that they don't have too many people that they can't support, and their numbers never dwindle enough where they go on hard times, which is super cool. But I still think if you're going to have a modest-sized town, and I guess it's because there's no outlying stuff. This is all a very concentrated town because they have walls up to keep all the critters out. So I guess that it's all right, but still, that I honestly think that number should be higher. Even 2 or 3 times higher than that, and it would be fine. But it just strikes me as a little bit weird. And I absolutely adore that there are cooking recipes in this section. I can't cook for anything, but I know somebody who does, and I'm going to spring that on them at some point and say, hey, you need to try and make this. Let me know how this comes out. And I think that's super cool. I hope that they're things that the creators have made and not just things that they've looked up. Especially if they were like family recipes, that would be so delectable. I probably won't like any of it because I'm super picky, but it's just such a cool thing. And I'm not going to go any deeper in here because then people could just read all the stuff. But it's just dealing with the Fae stuff and having it be like Monster Island. It's not just the creatures that want to kill you. Straight at the bottom here, shrapnel trees. These trees kill people. That's literally how they reproduce, is because they drop like pine cones that explode. And the needles that explode from these pine cones get embedded into people, dig their way in, and that's how they grow, because they need bone marrow and blood and, the elements of a living body to grow, to start growing. And so I don't remember if it had a range for them, but you got to think either this thing really slowly kills somebody, or it shoots for a long ways away that it could hit somebody, and then you'd have another tree like 50 to 100 feet away, because trees especially like this, can't really be all that tightly packed because they don't grow straight up. They're winding all over the place, and their canopies are huge. So they got to be some distance away from each other. So yeah, it's got to have some range on that. And just thinking that, they've got murderous plants, creature eating plants, like giant fly traps that will eat you. It's like not only are there creatures everywhere, some that might be smart enough to trick you and kill you, others that are just powerful and can overwhelm you and kill you. Also, the forest itself is trying to kill you. It's like that is what Fae means. Everything is deadly. And I think that's fantastic. It's Monster Island. Everything here is deadly. Everything wants to kill you. That is just such a super cool background to work with and makes adventures into or from this island super interesting, because you could have a group somehow mysteriously land on the island, which is incredibly hard. It goes into detail of why it's insanely difficult for anybody to even get to the island, never mind surviving on it, and the reasons why surviving on it are incredibly difficult. But if it's you could just pluck this out, put it in your homebrew world, and just say, "Oh yeah, people can get there," but nobody comes back because that's just how deadly it is. And I think that's so interesting. There's so many cool things you can do with this, and we do have later on the unique things that you get here, and we shall skip right to that. I don't want people just reading this as I scroll through it, because that would be no good. But right here, we got a map of the city. So it's pretty walled off, and there's a lot of lakes. So there aren't a ton of houses. You could probably count how many houses are here and extrapolate exactly how many people could live there if each one of these buildings had, like a family of 3 or whatever. And it's like, sure, but some of them got to be like duplexes and 3-story buildings or whatever. But even then, you could find a maximum number through all these buildings. But I still think the number is just too small. Just how I feel from having grown up in a smaller community. Because it says 400 feet on it for this scale. I also like how it's tilted. If you looked at the compass on it, it's tilted, which is super interesting. And they've got a great culture based around dancing. They believe that their dances herald the seasons and this sort of stuff. And that's because there is magic in the palace, so that when they throw a ball for every season and everybody's dancing, everybody who is at the ball is helping to do a ritual spell. That is fantastic. That is so interesting. And here we have a bunch of feats for, dancing. You start with the base dance, and then there's other sort of interesting abilities you can pick up from it. Like most options, I think they're a little bit undertuned, but most things in Pathfinder 2 are, in my opinion. They also have the Fey influence stuff, which is super cool. I would probably say allow your characters to come up with some more things than this, because a lot of these are pretty weak. But again, that's just my opinion on most post-core things. And a lot of people think that that's because they're trying to avoid power creep. And it's like, cool, but everything could be more interesting and a little bit more powerful. because you're spending class feats on these. Have them at least do cool stuff and be useful. But I think that Fey ones are ancestry feats, so it would be, do you have an ancestry whose feats don't really do much for you? Then you could maybe pick some of this stuff up. But you're supposed to be either beastkin or human, and so humans have tons of good feats. So why would you want to give up that for some of this stuff? Because a lot of them aren't great. Like Fey Ascension, a 9th level feat. Unicorn, you become trained in medicine, or an expert if you were already trained. You earn a +2 status bonus to saves against poison and charm effects. That is trash. I'm sorry to whoever made this, but that is hot garbage. There is no way by 9th level anybody who wants to ever do medicine will get any use out of this. Because if you're going to be good at medicine, you need to get expert by level 2, so that at level 4 and 6 you can pick up the 2 powerful skill feats for medicine that makes it useful. Because without them, it's still not great. And so getting expert at level 9 when you could already be master is terrible. Like, this is more of a throwaway backup sort of thing, not anything you would ever be good at, which you'd think as a unicorn you should maybe have, like, lay on hands or something. But their first ability that they get is you can cast heal, which is cool. It's very thematic. It doesn't say what level, which means I think you can only cast first level heal, and that's trash. It's only useful for a couple levels, and then it's literally useless. I think I would definitely make that more akin to lay on hands. I think that would be a lot better. But, I think most of these are extremely weak, as is most options. See, look at this. Bhopanese Mada cake. It's just a recipe for cake. That is so cool. And whoever thought to do that, you're a genius. You are a phenomenal genius. This, hopefully somebody makes this and, maybe puts out some pictures, or maybe a short little video on YouTube or wherever, social media garbage that shows somebody eating it or whatever, to just show, hey, this is the cool cake, and this is how squishy it is, and how it looks when you cut into it and stuff, because that right there just adds so much to the culture of these people, that you can see, hey, this is one of their famous dishes, this is the kind of stuff that they love eating. Looking at the foods people eat is immensely immersive into their culture. So having this here is just such a fantastic idea. I absolutely love that, even if it probably won't actually get any real use, but it's just so cool. We got a whole bunch of cool Fey feats. And then you get feats for if you are in the Green Watch of Bhopan, which are their elite scouts that go out every night and deal with the wilderness, which is super cool. I think, first off, all of these feats only work on Fey, predominantly, which is extremely unuseful. If you are only playing in a campaign that's around Bhopan, or that the whole thing is going to be most enemies are going to be 40 to 60% Fey, then this stuff can be good for you. But I don't think, mechanic-wise, development-wise, it makes much sense to make things that are only useful against these one things. It should have, a general use and then a more specific bonus against Fae. Like, I think that would have been a lot better. Because I don't think there should be choices that are just bad. And there kind of is a lot of underwhelming choices in Pathfinder 2. Like, for how well it's balanced, there's a lot of poorly balancing stuff that tips it down into the weaker section. And I get that it comes from a place of being terrified of making things that are too powerful, but it's like, you already put out the core rulebook. You already put out the two most powerful classes in the game, the fighter and the barbarian. They are the most powerful classes, period. I already went over all this in a previous video, but, nothing else just will stop your campaign faster than not being able to do damage. Everything else, failing social stuff, failing traps or whatever, you can get injured. It might be really bad. Somebody might maybe die, but combat is where you're going to end your campaign. So if you're bad at combat, then you can end your campaign. If you have 4 barbarians in a party and they're all dumb and have no charisma, you can still survive through a campaign by just hitting your head against everything until it breaks. That is an option. Where doing the other way, making a complete group of intelligence and charisma-based characters that are super smart and charismatic and can do all the other things but aren't so effective in combat, you will probably die in an AP. That's just the facts of the system. And so with that in mind, I don't think there's a reason why a lot of these feats that, these ones are only for rangers, investigators, and gunslingers. So these could definitely be more powerful. I don't see a problem with that. But as always, that's me. I would definitely let characters get away with more stuff. And also for restrictions, the dancing stuff is only for swashbucklers, rogues, and bards. I think it's super weird to have a bard that's in a dancing stance, but it sort of makes sense. But stances are usually like for combat sort of stuff because that's where they're used. But I hope this is maybe a sort of a start towards doing other things, because I think if they put out a caster archetype that had a stance, that would be fantastic. It would be so cool to see casters, especially with Rage of Elements coming out. Like, I 100% see kineticists being like a stance-based class. That would be fantastic, because that's basically what you're doing anyway, is when you draw element, that's sort of your stance. And, it would be cool to have other casters be able to do that, to push themselves more in one direction or another. But, yeah. Definitely pick this book up. It's so damn good. All of this is so interesting. Even if you don't want to play in Galarian, you can lift these areas whole cloth from the setting and plop them down in yours. Make some changes or not, just use them as is, and they're just so good. Or just use them for inspiration for your own creations, because damn, they're so good. The only downside, I think, for this is that the Lost Omens line only puts out one amazing book a year. And I understand that even with that timeline, a lot of Paizo has been pushed to its limits and beyond. But as far as just fantastic content, you can't beat this. Like, there is nothing any other system has that has in-depth, awesome places like this done in such a amazing in-depth way as this. And as the first year for Lost Omens was pretty all over the place. Like, we got that ancestry guide, which had lizard folk in it and leshies. And I was like, yeah, a lot of people are going to pick this up who want those ancestries, but that's pretty much all they're going to be getting it for. What is the point of the Lost Omens other than to just, hey, these are the things that exist only in Galarian? But not really. Lizard folk are all over the place. And it's like, yeah, leshies were our Galarian only, but they also had not goblins, but hobgoblins in it. So it was kind of like, cool, those two things are in lots of other stuff too. They're not Lost Omens specific. So that wasn't a great idea. And then they came out with Absalom, which was kind of like, I don't really care about, the biggest, greatest city or whatever. I think I haven't read the book, so I don't know a lot about Absalom, but I think Matt Colville has the best, greatest city ever with in his setting, and because of the idiosyncrasies and like the kind of attitudes that the people have there and the things they say and the way he presents things is fantastic for his city. So maybe Absalom has some stuff like that. I don't really know, but it generally doesn't interest me too much. And it's like on an island or something, which I don't know. But from year 2 and now year 3, their books are the Lost Omen books are just so good. The first ones that they put out are sort of iffy because I think the Legends book is Lost Omens, which I was like, this doesn't interest me at all, so I don't care. But the Lost Omens books that are specifically about places, holy crap, these are the best books you can get that aren't pure rule books for any system. That's just it. So definitely go get them. I will keep saying that in every single one of these because it's the truth. You just go and get them. They're so freaking good. That is all for this one. Next, we will be delving into the necromantic lands of Geb. Until then, good evening.